As darkness falls and the fire smolders, it's time for Campfire Tales from Beyond the Grave. Not all witches were found in Salem, Massachusetts. In fact, there was a witch right here in Virginia, known as the Witch of Pungo. A long time ago, the Witch of Pungo, Grace Sherwood, was a widowed woman who lived by herself, and supposedly she dressed somewhat promiscuously for those days, which means every once in a while she walked around showing a little bit of ankle. Well, the women of the area grew very jealous of Grace Sherwood. And in a season when most of the crops failed, she turned out a really productive crop, which was unusual in those days for a woman living by herself. Well, the townspeople accused her of witchcraft. They said she would be seen out at night, dancing in her fields, casting spells over the crops. So Grace Sherwood was tried and convicted. They took her down to Witch Duck Point in Virginia Beach, not far from Virginia Beach. And it's believed that water will not accept evil spirits. So the true test of a witch is to dunk her in the water. If she floats, she's evil. She's a witch. If she sinks and drowns, she's innocent, but dead. So they took Grace Sherwood down to Witch Duck Point, and they tied her hands to her feet, and they took her out in a boat and cast her into the water. Well, to everyone's surprise, according to legend, Grace Sherwood floated. Not only did she float, the waves grew high that day, and water came crashing up on shore. Carriages were washed off the road. Now, this is just according to legend, of course. So Grace Sherwood, who realistically probably just freed herself from the bonds and was able to swim to safety, she was actually convicted of witchcraft and served 7 years in prison. She was eventually released and lived out her life right there in Pungo, Virginia. Now, what's interesting is after Grace Sherwood died, coming up into modern times, they do a event in Williamsburg, I believe it's called Cry Witch, where they'll have a mock trial of Grace Sherwood down there in the courthouse. Now, for the longest time, tourists would be in there and they'd see a woman dressed in period clothing standing in the back of the audience. And they'd always ask, who was that woman? Who's that woman that's standing back there? She looks so realistic, so serious, but so out of place. She doesn't look like the other reenactors. No one knew who she was. Well, in the early 2000s, Grace Sherwood was eventually exonerated, long after her death. As soon as Grace Sherwood was exonerated, this woman, this mysterious woman, never again appeared at the hearing in Williamsburg. It is believed that this lady was actually the ghost of Grace Sherwood, haunted by the fact that she was branded a witch. Her spirit couldn't rest and manifested in that courthouse to relive that trial time and time again. A lot of the history of Grace Sherwood can be found at the Ferry Plantation in Virginia Beach. The little shack that she once lived in is long gone, the little house out in Pungo. but they were able to actually take bulbs that Grace Sherwood planted at that house, and they planted them at the Ferry Plantation. And to this day, every spring, those bulbs bloom, and perhaps Grace Sherwood's spirit stops by every once in a while to check in on her flowers.